It's like Groundhog's Day, but with a killer. And here's the sequel. Happy Death Day 2 review. Hey y'all, it's your Twisted Girl Next Door here, and today I am doing a review of the movie Happy Death Day 2U, which is a sequel to Happy Death Day. Main character Tree wakes up in horror to learn that she's stuck in a parallel universe. Her boyfriend Carter is now with someone else, and her friends and fellow students seem to be completely different versions of themselves. When Tree discovers that Carter's roommate has been altering time, she finds herself once again the target of a mass killer. Okay, so overall, this movie wasn't bad. It just wasn't very great. Wasn't very good either. And the reason why I say that is because it fell into the trope of trying to explain everything, particularly everything that happened in the first movie, to the point that it gets so muddled that you're left thinking, I didn't need to know that. Final girl Tree. I really like this character. One of the things I loved about the first one was that it subverted the final girl trope, right? Which a lot of movies have been doing lately, where it makes it so that, we all know the sort of final girl that's allowed to be the final girl. She's usually kind of angelic, virginal, things of that nature, very nice to everyone. And the thing about Tree is that she wasn't nice to everyone, right? She was kind of mean and things of that nature. And she kind of gets redeemed in the first one when it comes to the movie to kind of earn life, to kind of earn the chance for survival by thinking things through, although she still has an edge to her. And in this movie, the sequel, she definitely still has that edge. She's still not as super nice, and she still has her moments of pettiness and things of that nature, which really work. And I really like this character. I think this character is a character that you care for, and I think that's really important with any kind of plot line, any kind of narrative, that you want to care about the plight of the protagonist, or at least one of the characters. But if you can make it so that people care about the protagonist, but not to the point where they're kind of a Mary Sue, it really works. And Tree is a character that really works as a final girl. Heart. So the movie definitely has some really touching moments, which I know is weird to say for what is supposed to be a horror slasher film. Although I think we're getting to the point nowadays where you can't have these kind of movies where, for one, I think with horror, you can do all types of stuff with horror, romance, comedy, and things of that nature, and it's still horror. Yes, it's still horror, y'all. And so in this particular movie, there were some very heartfelt moments, in particular in connection with the character of Tree, in dealing with certain characters that she had to become close to, and other characters that are introduced that work really well for some of the narrative. So that really helps the story. So it keeps you once again caring about what's happening to these people. The plot and the plot holes. Oh my gosh. Right, so what I was saying was that this movie tries to explain why things happen the way they did. As you heard in me saying the synopsis, is that in this particular case, it's not exactly Groundhog Day that she's stuck in, but it's still sort of a groundhog scenario, but she's also now in a parallel universe. Yeah. Doesn't that sound very, complicated and convoluted? Yeah, because it is. And no, they don't do a very good job of unpacking why any of this is happening. They literally have characters stop and explain things for you, aka one of the characters, but really they're explaining it for the audience in case the audience is confused, right? You know that mechanism of storytelling, and it doesn't help. I mean, I like to consider myself a pretty smart person, so when for the most part. So, in listening to them explain the way things are happening, I'm like, okay, that kind of makes sense, but you didn't explain this other thing. There were things where they would really go into, a lot of time to explain one part, but then it was that other thing that they should have been explaining that they don't. So you're left there thinking, yeah, you really over-explained that, and there's this gaping, plot hole there that you didn't talk about. Where did that go? There are things that start and don't get finished. We kind of are just made to forget about it when they throw all the other sciencey stuff at us. And I didn't appreciate it. I was like, well, if you're going to do this thing where you try to explain why things happen, you better do a darn good job. And they didn't. They tried. A for effort, I guess. No. And if you watch this film, please come back to this video and tell me in the comments, because there were some plot holes I don't even feel like getting into because they annoyed me so much. And yeah, they tried to explain way too much, and it just fell through, to the point where I felt like scenes, it didn't pick up its momentum because they had to keep trying to explain everything to us. The comedy doesn't really land. One of the things I liked about the first one is that it was a mixture of comedy and kind of a slasher film and kind of a Groundhog Day slasher film. And the comedy worked because it wasn't too much, so you still believed in the stakes. For whatever reason, in this particular one, they decided to ramp up the comedy really hard, to the point where it's almost slapstick, to the point where I don't mind slapstick, but it has to be well placed, to the point where it's not, look at this zany thing happening, guys. And it really fell into, look at this zany thing happening, guys. And then in some cases, it wasn't funny. Like, some of the jokes just weren't funny. It was just kind of like, I think that's supposed to be hilarious. And probably the biggest con for me, this is the biggest one, is that this franchise completely switched genres. Now, I know I said that horror can be everything, right? Like, you can have a horror romance, you can have a horror action, you can have a horror romance action. And the first one kind of was that, right? It was a horror slasher Groundhog Day cosmic happening thing going on with the first movie, which, you know, one of the things we loved about the first movie, or I think a lot of people loved about the first movie, is that it subverted the slasher subgenre of horror, right? Like, there's a certain way that slasher flicks go, and that movie kind of used that base and then subverted it, which was awesome. But at its heart, it was still something of a slasher flick. You were still wondering, who's the killer? What's going on? And there were some actual intense thriller-like sequences of, where's the killer gonna come out from, right? Like in a good slasher flick. This particular movie, the sequel, threw that out the window. Like, there were some moments, but it literally became a sci-fi comedy. This movie became a sci-fi comedy. Be warned. If you are going back into this theater to watch it as a sequel of a subverted slasher flick Groundhog Day thing, you will be disappointed. Because that's not what this movie is. And don't get me wrong, I don't dislike sci-fi comedies. What I dislike is making me think I'm going to go see another slasher flick and getting a sci-fi comedy. That's what I don't like. And you could say, well, maybe it's a horror sci-fi comedy. No. I think the main trigger is that there is suicide, and lots of it. But if you watch the first one, you know why there's suicide in it. So. No, the intensity, the mystery, the intensity of the first one is pretty much gone. I'm going to say I'm 50-50 on it being stab approved. Like I said, it's not a bad movie. What it is that it's not as good as the first one. But there's a lot of franchise movies that aren't as good as the first one, and they still stand on their own to be a decent film to go see. What I will say is, if you are curious about where the story itself goes when it comes to Tree and her friends and what her predicament is, then yes, go watch this film, because it's not a bad turn. It's just could have been executed better, and that's that. Now, if you're going there because you want to see a cool slasher flick with a cool different angle kind of a deal like the first one was, you aren't gonna like this movie. What did you think? Did you watch this movie? Let me know. Comment down below. What do you think of what I said when it comes to sci-fi comedy versus something being part of horror? Let me know. Comment down below. And also, be sure to subscribe so that you're the first to know when I post my videos of all things horror and dark fantasy. Thanks for watching. Let's get creepy together.